They always call for him, especially when their tiny hearts ache with longing. Santa, please bring me this. Santa, please make them love each other again. Santa, make everything better. Every year, they write their letters, pour their hopes into ink, and send them away. Fragile wishes, wrapped in lies they barely understand. For centuries, he answered. His sleigh would sweep across the skies, and joy would spill into their homes like candlelight in the dark. But Santa doesn't answer everyone. Some letters fall. They drift too far, landing in places they were never meant to go, places like mine. And when their cries go unanswered, I listen. This time, I found them in an old, rusted letterbox, forgotten by the snowstorm that had swallowed the town whole. 3 little voices, trembling with hope, calling out to be saved. I read them all, their fragile words trembling on the edge of despair. I had to laugh. Oh, how sweet their desperation tasted. But I am not Santa. What I bring isn't joy. It isn't hope or love. What I bring is fair, fairer than anything their precious Santa could ever offer. I give them what they ask for, exactly what they ask for. I am the answer to their wishes, the echo in the hollow when all light is gone. Tonight, I will visit 3 houses. Each has a child who reached for hope and found me instead. I will answer their prayers in my own way. And when I leave, they will understand. The first house sits at the end of a cul-de-sac, buried under a blanket of untouched snow. Inside, warm yellow lights glow behind the frosted windows. A boy named Tommy lives here, his 9-year-old heart heavy with loneliness. I already know his wish. I felt it in every trembling word he wrote. Santa, I just want a new best friend, someone who won't leave me. How could I not answer such a heartfelt plea? I stepped closer, my presence melting the snow beneath me, leaving no footprints. The house hums with the quiet murmur of a family unaware, wrapped in the dull safety of a suburban Christmas Eve. They don't know I'm here, don't hear the creak of the icy air as it bends around me. Tommy is in his room, bathed in the glow of colored lights strung along his walls. His parents are asleep, their hushed arguments buried under the hum of a television left on in the living room. Tommy stares at his window watching the snow swirl. He's waiting for Santa, but Santa doesn't visit tonight. I reach for my bag. It isn't red and soft like his. It's black, stitched from shadows, filled with things that should never see the light. From it, I pull his gift. A doll, wooden and polished, its face carved with a smile that feels too wide. Its eyes are black, shiny, and empty, reflecting the room like an unblinking mirror. In its hands, it holds a key, one meant for secrets. I place the doll at the foot of his bed, careful not to wake him. The air around me shifts, as though the house knows something has entered that doesn't belong. Tommy, I whisper, though my voice carries no sound, your new best friend is here. The doll tilts its head ever so slightly, as though listening. Tommy stirs, and I vanish into the shadows, leaving the boy to find his gift. Tomorrow, the whispers will begin. The storm swallowed the town with the appetite of a starving beast. Snow piled in heaps, devouring roads, burying cars, and snuffing out the glow of street lamps. It was the kind of cold that silenced the world, where even the faintest whispers could carry for miles. And still, they hoped. In a house at the end of Willow Street, a boy named Tommy sat by a fogged window, clutching a half-written letter in trembling hands. His room was a cluttered battlefield of broken toys and neglected books, but none of it mattered. Not when his best friend had moved away 3 months ago, leaving him with no one. No one to talk to, no one to trust. His tears smudged the ink as he scribbled his final words. Santa, I just want a new best friend, someone who will never leave me. Down the street, in a house filled with cracks both in the walls and in its people, Lily wrote her letter by candlelight. She ignored the sound of her parents fighting in the other room. Words flung like knives, louder and louder, until the walls felt thin enough to shatter. She pressed the pen harder, her hand shaking as she wrote, Dear Santa, please make my parents happy again. I'll do anything. Farther out, in a home buried under snowdrifts, Max wrote his letter with his sister curled up beside him. Her breath was labored, her cheeks pale. She was always sick now, and the doctor said the winter wasn't helping. Max's knuckles were white as he gripped the pencil and wrote, Santa, can you make it snow more? She loves the snow. It's the only thing that makes her smile. 3 letters, 3 children, 3 desperate wishes. The storm buried their words, left them forgotten in a box no one checked anymore. No one except me. I read them under the shadows of an ancient oak, my fingers brushing the fragile paper like they were priceless artifacts. Such small hopes, such frail things. They will learn tonight how wishes can shatter. The first house sat at the edge of Willow Street, its windows dark, its inhabitants asleep. Snow whispered against the roof as I arrived, unseen and uninvited. Tommy's wish weighed heavy in my grasp, the words etched into the fabric of the night. Santa, I just want a new best friend. Someone who will never leave me. How sweet, how naive. Friendship as if it were a thing to summon, a thing to bind without consequence. I found his room easily. The faint smell of peanut butter and crumpled candy wrappers clung to the air. His small figure lay bundled beneath a thick quilt, his cheeks still wet from crying himself to sleep. Beside his bed I placed the gift. It was a doll, wooden and jointed, its painted smile wide and welcoming. In one hand, it held a tiny notepad, the pages already filled with words only Tommy could read. I ran my fingers along its polished surface, watching the enchantment seep in, twisting its purpose just enough. A best friend, yes, but one who knows every secret he has ever buried. I whispered into the doll's ear, and its painted eyes gleamed. "Wake up," I said. Tommy stirred, his eyes blinking open to meet the doll's smiling face. For a moment there was silence, confusion giving way to wonder. Who are you?" Tommy asked, his voice trembling. "I'm your new best friend," the doll replied, its voice soft, warm, and laced with something far darker. Tommy smiled then, wide and bright, clutching the doll to his chest. He didn't notice how the room seemed colder now, how the shadows along the walls stretched unnaturally long. He didn't notice the faint sound of the doll's laughter, hollow and endless. I left him there, his wish granted, his fate sealed. Down the street, Lily's house was waiting. Her letter had been left on the kitchen counter, a small beacon of despair among the clutter of unpaid bills and shattered glasses. "Dear Santa, please make my parents happy again. I'll do anything." The argument was still raging upstairs. Her father's voice was raw, her mother's words sharp as broken glass. I smiled as I entered her room. She slept curled up, hands clenched tight over her pillow, as if she could block out the world. "Oh, Lily," I whispered. "Happiness is such a fragile thing." Lily stirred faintly in her sleep, the faint flicker of the candlelight on her bedside table, casting her delicate face in gold and shadow. Her letter lay folded neatly beneath her hand, as though she'd fallen asleep praying to it. "Happiness," I murmured again, picking up the letter with careful fingers. "Such a peculiar thing to ask for, isn't it?" Her parents' voices thundered from the floor above, venomous and sharp. Their anger seeped through the ceiling like an unending storm, drowning every ounce of warmth that might have once existed here. I placed the gift beside her, a trinket no bigger than her palm, a heart-shaped pendant on a thin, silver chain. It shimmered faintly, but its beauty was a lie. This pendant wasn't crafted to bring joy, it was forged for silence. As the last syllables of my whisper wove into the charm, her hand twitched and her breathing stilled. The pendant glowed faintly, then faded. When Lily woke the next morning, she would find her wish granted. Her parents would no longer fight, for their words would never reach her. She would hear nothing, not laughter, not music, not their voices. The price of their happiness would be her own. Satisfied, I turned away from her bed, leaving behind a silence so profound it could never be undone. The last house was farther out, nearly buried beneath the storm's relentless grasp. Max's letter was heavier than the others, thick with desperation. "Santa, can you make it snow more? She loves the snow. It's the only thing that makes her smile." How cruel, I thought, smiling as I approached the frost-covered window. He wanted to make her smile, this fragile boy with his trembling pencil and unshakable hope. And he asked for snow, the very thing that would bury them both. I entered quietly. Max slept beside his sister, her frail body curled tightly against him. A small lantern burned faintly on the bedside table, flickering as I approached. For him, I left no trinket or toy. For him, I offered the storm itself. Outside, the snow began to fall faster, heavier, each flake laced with my whispers. The drifts would climb higher, locking them inside, sealing them away in a frozen cocoon. "This is what you asked for," I whispered into the wind. "A white Christmas she'll never forget." The storm howled as I stepped back into the shadows, leaving behind 3 gifts and a promise of ruin. Tommy's mother found him in his room the next morning, sitting cross-legged on the floor. The doll rested on his lap, its painted eyes fixed upward, its wooden smile as unyielding as ever. "Tommy, are you okay?" she asked, pausing in the doorway. "I'm great," Tommy replied, his voice unnervingly bright. "This is my new best friend. He knows everything about me." She hesitated. "That's nice, sweetie." Tommy tilted his head, his gaze never leaving the doll. "He said you don't like when I leave my toys everywhere, that you think I'm messy." "What?" "And he knows what Dad said about my grades. He said Dad thinks I'm not trying hard enough, but I am." His mother froze, her hand tightening on the doorknob. Something about the doll unsettled her, the way its head seemed to tilt slightly toward her, its empty gaze too knowing. By that evening, Tommy was refusing to eat. "My friend told me I don't need to. He said he'll take care of me." His parents grew worried, but no matter what they said, Tommy wouldn't part with the doll. By the next night, whispers filled his room. Not Tommy's voice, not theirs. Just the doll's, low and deliberate, spilling every secret Tommy had ever shared. The shadows in the room grew darker, longer. At Lily's house, silence replaced chaos. Her parents sat across the table, both visibly confused. For the first time in years, there was no shouting, no accusations flung like daggers. They spoke cautiously, their voices barely louder than whispers. "Do you think she's okay?" her mother asked, glancing toward Lily's room. "She seemed fine this morning," her father replied, though his brow furrowed with doubt. Lily had woken to find the pendant on her nightstand. She'd put it on immediately, marveling at its soft glow. She had smiled when her parents spoke to her, but her response had been unnerving. She didn't speak. No matter what they said, no matter how loudly they asked, Lily remained silent. Her expression was eerily calm, as though their words no longer mattered to her. She seemed happy. By the 3rd day, they noticed she didn't react to anything at all. Not the sound of her favorite song, not the crash of a dish shattering on the kitchen floor. Her parents began to panic, their attempts at conversation growing frantic. Lily only smiled, her fingers tracing the heart-shaped pendant. The silence between them grew unbearable, and at Max's house, the snow fell endlessly. The windows were frosted over, the drifts piling so high they could no longer see the yard. The house creaked under the weight of the storm, the cold seeping through every crack in the walls. Max's sister coughed in her sleep, her breaths growing shallower as the days dragged on. He pressed his hand against the icy window, whispering, "I just wanted her to smile." By the end of the week, the children were beginning to unravel. Tommy no longer slept. He stayed up through the nights, sitting with the doll and whispering secrets to it. The doll whispered back, its wooden lips unmoving, its painted smile widening ever so slightly. "It's okay, Tommy," it said. "I'll always listen. I'll always be here for you." Tommy's parents could hear the whispers through the door, and it chilled them to the bone. Every attempt to take the doll away ended in screams, his voice shrill and filled with panic. "You can't! He'll tell everyone!" Tommy cried, clutching the doll tighter. The shadows in his room deepened, the air heavy and cold, as if the doll's presence was growing stronger. That night, his parents heard him sobbing through the walls, but when they opened the door, the room was empty. Just Tommy, sitting on the floor, his face pale, the doll still smiling in his lap. Lily's silence had begun to terrify her parents. She moved like a ghost through the house, her face serene, her fingers always brushing the pendant around her neck. Her parents begged her to speak, to react, but it was as though their words simply didn't reach her. They began to turn on each other, the strain pulling their fragile truce apart. "This is your fault," her father shouted. "She's like this because of you." "You think I don't know that?" her mother yelled back, tears streaming down her face. Their voices grew louder, harsher, as if trying to fill the silence Lily left behind. She sat in her room, staring blankly at the wall, the faint hum of the pendant the only sound she could hear. And yet she smiled. At Max's house, the snow showed no signs of stopping. The drifts had reached the roofline, and the walls groaned under the storm's weight. Inside, the air was frigid, the firewood almost gone. Max had spent the first few days holding his sister's hand, whispering stories to her as she lay wrapped in blankets. but her condition worsened. Her breathing grew faint, and her skin turned as pale as the snow outside. He blamed himself. "This is my fault," he whispered, staring into the frost-coated glass. "I just wanted to make her happy." He began to see things in the storm, shadows moving through the white, shapes that didn't belong. The howling wind carried whispers low and haunting, and when Max pressed his ear to the window, he swore he heard a voice. "Smile for me, Max." The three children were connected now, though they didn't know it. Their nightmares had begun to overlap, each seeing glimpses of a figure cloaked in shadow with hollow eyes and a voice like the wind. Tommy woke up to a voice in his room. At first, he thought it was the doll again, whispering its usual secrets, words only he could hear. But this time, the voice wasn't coming from his lap. It was deeper, colder, and it spoke from every shadow in the room. "Tommy," it called, "I've been watching you." He clutched the doll tighter, his breath hitching as the temperature in the room plummeted. The walls seemed to close in, the corners growing darker and darker until the only light came from the doll's painted eyes. They glowed faintly now, filled with a wicked intelligence. "Who are you?" Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. The shadows stirred, taking shape. A figure stepped forward, cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a veil of darkness. "I'm the one who answered your wish," it said. "Didn't you want a best friend who would never leave you?" Tommy shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I didn't mean—" "Oh, but you did." The figure gestured to the doll, whose grin widened, its teeth sharp now, unnatural. "And I gave you what you asked for." The doll began to laugh, its voice echoing through the room as Tommy screamed. Lily's nightmare was different. She was in her room, but it wasn't right. The walls were too high, stretching endlessly into the dark. The floor beneath her was cold and wet, the texture like melting ice. The pendant around her neck burned hot against her skin, the hum growing louder until it drowned out everything else. She tried to take it off, but her fingers couldn't seem to grasp it. And then she heard them. Her parents' voices, faint and distorted, calling her name. But the words were wrong. The tone wasn't angry, it was desperate, pleading. "Lily, please come back," her mother's voice said, breaking into sobs. "We're sorry," her father added. "We love you. Please, please talk to us." She turned in circles, searching for them, but the darkness swallowed every sound. She opened her mouth to scream, but no noise came out. The silence stretched on, pressing down on her until it felt like she would drown in it. Her knees buckled, and she fell, tears streaming down her face. The pendant glowed brighter, its hum now a roar, and for the first time, she felt truly afraid. Max's nightmare came with the storm. He stood in the middle of the blizzard, his house gone, the world around him buried in endless white. The wind screamed, carrying voices with it, low and menacing. "Max," they called, "why did you let her die?" His stomach twisted as he turned, searching for his sister. She was there, just ahead of him, standing barefoot in the snow. Her lips were blue, her eyes dull, her arms hanging limply at her sides. "Come back inside," he yelled, running toward her. "Please, it's too cold." But as he reached for her, she turned her head slowly, her face pale and expressionless. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Instead, her eyes flickered with the same shadow that had haunted his dreams, a darkness that moved like smoke curling inside her chest. "Smile for me, Max," she whispered. The snow around them turned black, swallowing the ground, and Max fell, screaming into the abyss. The three children awoke simultaneously, their hearts racing, their screams echoing in the night. Though miles apart, they shared the same moment of realization. Their wishes had brought this upon them. Somehow they had to fix it. The three children didn't know how they arrived there, but suddenly they were together. It wasn't the world they knew, no streets, no houses, no warmth. Instead, they stood in a vast, frozen expanse, the ground shimmering like cracked glass beneath their feet. Above them, the sky churned with thick, black clouds, broken only by flashes of crimson lightning. Where are we?" Max stammered, pulling his arms around himself as the bitter cold bit into his skin. Tommy clutched the doll tighter, its wooden eyes glowing faintly. "I don't know." Lily stood silently, her pendant humming faintly at her chest. For the first time she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I think this is where he wanted us." A shadow stirred in the distance. The figure emerged slowly, cloaked in darkness, its hollow eyes reflecting the storm around them. Its voice cut through the frozen air, sharp and deliberate. You came together, how touching. The children froze, their breaths visible in the frigid air. Tommy stepped forward, his legs trembling. You're the one who answered our wishes. Why are you doing this to us? The figure tilted its head, as though amused. I gave you exactly what you wanted. You asked, and I delivered. Is that not what you wanted, Tommy? A friend who would never leave? Tommy looked down at the doll in his arms, its grin wider now, its wooden hands twitching as though alive. He dropped it with a gasp, and the doll hit the ground, laughing as it cracked but did not break. You twisted everything, Lily said, her voice shaking but growing stronger. This isn't what we wanted. The figure's laughter echoed, deep and bone-chilling. You wished blindly, without thought. I simply filled the space your precious Santa left behind. Max's fists clenched. Then take it back! Fix it! The figure's smile widened beneath the shadows of its hood. Oh no, there are no takebacks in this game, little ones. Your wishes are your truths now. You can't undo them. The children exchanged desperate looks. We have to fight him, Lily said, her voice firm. He's feeding off us, off our wishes. We have to take them back ourselves. How? Tommy whispered. Together, Lily said, holding out her hand. The children linked hands, their fear giving way to something stronger. Their wishes had been selfish, driven by desperation. But here, together, they shared one wish, one pure, untainted thought. We wish for him to go away, Lily whispered. The storm around them howled, the wind slicing at their skin, but they didn't let go. We wish for him to leave, Max shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The figure's laughter faltered, the shadows around it flickering. You think you can overpower me? I am born from your fears, your mistakes. But the children's voices rose together, their chant echoing across the frozen expanse. With each word, the figure began to unravel, its form breaking apart like smoke caught in a gale. No, it roared, its voice splitting into 1,000 fragments. You don't understand. There will always be more like me. Wishes unanswered. Hopes left to rot. I will find them. The storm swallowed its words, the sky cracking open with one final, deafening boom. The figure vanished, leaving the children alone in silence. They woke up in their own beds, the night still and quiet, as though the storm had never come. Their gifts were gone. Tommy's doll, Lily's pendant, and the endless snow around Max's home, all erased. But the memory lingered. The morning was eerily quiet. For Tommy, the sunlight streaming through his window felt like a lie. He sat up, his eyes darting to the corner of the room where the doll had been. The spot was empty, yet the memory of its laughter lingered like a cold hand on his shoulder. His mother peeked into his room, a hesitant smile on her face. Good morning, sweetie. Are you okay? Tommy nodded slowly. For the first time in days, her concern felt real. The shadows in the room had lifted, but he knew better than to trust the stillness completely. At Lily's house, her parents were cautiously optimistic. She had spoken that morning, quietly, but enough to make their hearts swell with hope. The pendant was gone, but the silence it had left behind had burned itself into their memories. Lily sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the snow-covered street. Her parents spoke softly in the background, careful not to break the fragile peace. I'm sorry, Lily said suddenly, her voice trembling. Her parents froze, exchanging a look before rushing to her side. What for, sweetheart? Her mother asked, her voice breaking. For everything. I just wanted you to be happy. Her father knelt beside her, tears in his eyes. You don't have to make us happy, Lily. We're gonna do better. We promise. She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, but deep inside she wondered if the silence would ever truly leave her. For Max, the snow had finally stopped. His house was no longer buried, and the air inside felt warmer than it had in days. His sister sat up in bed, weak but smiling. You're okay, he whispered, relief flooding his voice. I dreamed about you, she said softly. I dreamed you were stuck in the snow, but you found your way out. He swallowed hard, brushing a hand over his face to hide the tears. Yeah, I guess I did. She gripped his hand tightly, her smile faint but real. Thank you. Max nodded, but his gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the snow lay still and undisturbed, but the faint outline of footsteps lingered. Steps that didn't belong to him or anyone else. The three children met weeks later, during a rare sunny afternoon when the snow had begun to melt. They didn't speak much at first, each carrying the weight of what they had experienced. Eventually, Tommy broke the silence. "Do you think he's really gone?" Lily shook her head, her expression unreadable. "He said there are more like him. He might be gone, but—" Max finished the thought. "It doesn't mean we're safe." They stood together, their shadows long against the snow, and as they walked home, each child thought they heard the faintest sound, a distant jingle, soft and deliberate, like a reminder. Somewhere far away, under a dark sky, a figure crouched by a forgotten letterbox, running long fingers over the fragile wishes inside. "I'll be listening," it whispered. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to let us know in the comments which story kept you up at night. Your feedback inspires us to create even more haunting adventures. Hit that like button to support the channel, share this video with your friends who love a good scare, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another eerie encounter. And hey, if you have your own creepy story, drop it in the comments. We might feature it in a future video. Finally, check out the videos popping up on your screen right now for even more spine-tingling content. Trust me, you don't want to miss them. Stay safe and sleep well.